Okay, thanks, Melissa. So we will get started. Welcome, everyone. My name's Bernie Daigle, and I currently look after knowledge exchange for the Atlantic Forestry Centre. But before that, I spent about 15 years as lab supervisor for the National Tree Seed Centre. Bonjour tout le monde, je m'appelle Bernard Daigle et puis je m'occupe du transfert de connaissances pour le Centre de foresterie de l'Atlantique. Plus tôt de ma carrière, je passe une quinzaine d'années comme superviseur de laboratoire au Centre national de semences forestières. Avant de commencer, j'aimerais souligner quelques remarques d'ordre administratif. Before starting, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping notes. As was stated in the email invitation, today's presentation will be in English. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available to participants. The presentation slides will also be available in both French and English. Tel qu'indiqué dans le courriel d'invitation, cette présentation sera donnée en anglais. Le webinaire sera enregistré et disponible aux participants. Les diapos de la présentation seront aussi disponibles en français et en anglais. Nous vous demandons d'utiliser l'icône de questions-réponses pour poser vos questions. Les questions peuvent être posées soit en anglais ou en français, mais nous allons attendre jusqu'à la fin de la présentation pour répondre aux questions. We ask that you use the Q&A button to ask your questions. The questions may be asked in English or in French, but we will wait until after the presentation is over to answer all of the questions. Next slide, please. This is the last webinar in our Scaling Up Seed Supply series. We've had 3 previous webinars for those of you who may have been able to catch those. And these are available on YouTube. In the previous webinars, we covered equipment solutions, spring seeding hardwoods, and harvesting of berry crops. And as you know, today's presentation will be on forecasting of fall crops. If you want to view the preceding webinars and you have a hard time finding them, just contact the Seed Center and we'll get you to where you can find them. Next slide. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that we conduct our work activities on the treaty lands and territory of numerous and diverse Indigenous nations and pay tribute to their heritage and legacy. We aim to walk lightly, harvest with respect, and learn from local knowledge keepers of every nation. I'll now pass it on to our first speaker, Donnie McPhee. Donnie is the coordinator of the National Tree Seed Centre, and he will be giving an overview of the Indigenous Seed Collection Program. So Donnie?
Hi, thanks, Bernie. Yeah, so first of all, I want to mention that I'm a substitute here. Mary Knockwood, who has been hired on as our program manager for our Indigenous Seed Collection Program, was scheduled to give these slides, but the power is out in her region right now. I know people are having a lot of issues between Roger and power outages, but so I'm filling in here. I'm also going to take the opportunity. Again, I gave most of the first 3 presentations, and this is an opportunity. Today, you're going to meet more of our staff. So I'm just giving these first 3 slides. Something I had mentioned in the earlier presentations was, I think the first presentation we talked about the rumors of seed being included in the 2 billion tree program. Well, that is actually going to happen. So seed collecting is going to be part of the program. So there will be funding available for seed collecting. The exact details are being worked out, but expect this fall that calls proposals towards seed collecting will be, coming out. So that's why it's really important, I think, these seminars that we're giving, because if we're going to be collecting seed to support the 2 billion tree program, we want to make sure it's done right so it's usable in whichever region you currently reside in. The other exciting thing that happened just 3 weeks ago is that we actually got our funding for our Indigenous seed collection program through the ADM Innovation Fund. And what that means is that we now have funds for myself, along with other members of our staff, to actually get out on the road, coast to coast, meeting not only with Indigenous communities, but also with Parks Canada and other NGOs or organizations that are interested in seed collecting, and maybe they just need a little extra training or someone to bounce ideas off within the field. So if that interests you, I really strongly encourage you to send us a message, a note, email ASAP, letting us know. I myself am driving across the country, leaving in August, and I'll be gone for 3 months, driving right across the country. And on my trip, if you're an Indigenous community or a park or an NGO and I can work it in for a half-day session, then we'll do our best to make that happen. But now onto our Indigenous seed collection program. So this is something that we've been working on for a couple of years. It was announced this spring, but it really is to sort of help Indigenous communities that are interested in seed collecting becoming part of the 2 Billion Tree program, or maybe it's just for conservation needs of species of concern to them. So basically we got funding to help communities get rolling and get started on this endeavor. Understanding that there's over 600 First Nations communities with over 60 languages, but we want to take not just our experiences, but we want to incorporate the knowledge that all of our Indigenous communities have back into some of the methodologies that we use. Next slide, please. So some of the things that we're looking to do, again, is provide training, either virtual or in person whenever possible. If you are making collections and you don't have a facility to help with seed processing and storage, that's something that we can work on with you. And the same with testing of seed. And yes, for Lynn, the decks are all available to everyone. So would also be looking to sort of work on memorandum of understanding, just to ensure the protection of your seed and your intellectual properties for any seed that does come to the seed center. Again, understanding that we're just here to help you. So if you send seed to us, it's your seed. And hopefully down the road, maybe you have a storage facility that becomes available, and maybe you want to move your seed to there. But for now, we just want to be here to support your needs. And then the other thing, Mary Knockwood, who again was going to give this presentation, Mary's has a great background in finding funding sources. So if you need help potentially with some funding sources, Mary might be able to help you out as well. And the last slide, please. Yeah, and besides our road show and hitting the road to meet up with a lot of communities this fall, we're always open to having community members come to the National Tree Seed Center. I know we had a program with Ganawaki out of Quebec, and they sent 2 technicians to us who came and spent a week with us. And I know we're looking at doing that again. And there are lots of other communities across the country who are already talking to us about that, about sending technicians to the seed center, to spend a week or 2 and see how we do things, and then bring that knowledge and help incorporate some of the things maybe they know into what we do, but just sort of an information exchange. So yeah, I think that's all I'm going to say on that, and I'm going to hand it back to Bernie. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Donnie. I'm going to start with a bit of an overview of the Seed Center, just to put the Seed Center in perspective. Back in the late 1950s and early 60s, there was a lot of research by CFS scientists on tree seed. And this was in support of reforestation efforts by the provinces and industry. The researchers who were working on seed would make their own collections and their own processing of the seed, and the expertise that was available and the equipment that was available varied among the research groups. So this led to a system that was a little bit inefficient. So in 1967, the National Tree Seed Center was established in Petawawa, Ontario. And the original mandate of the Seed Center was to collect, to store, to process, and provide seed of known quality and origin for research. In 1996, the Seed Center moved to Fredericton, New Brunswick, and this coincided with new commitments from the federal government with the signing of the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Species at Risk Act. So the Seed Center's mandate changed, or I should say it grew to include collections for genetic conservation. And a good example here is that in 2004, and that was only 2 years after the emerald ash borer was discovered in Canada, National Tree Seed Center staff started an ash seed collection program, and that program continues to this day. Now, with the announcement of the 2 Billion Trees program, we realized that we might be able to play a role and share some of the knowledge that we've gained over 55 years of working with tree seeds. The webinar series and the webinar today is actually funded by the 2 Billion Trees program. However, you don't have to be part of the program to partake in the seminars. And anything that you hear here, if there's something that you need clarification on, you're most welcome to contact the Seed Center and get some more information. Next slide, please. So those of you who might have participated or watched the first webinar, you heard about the importance of seed source. Seed source has always been important, but it's even more so now because of climate change. Using the wrong seed source could lead to lower survival or decreased growth of the trees that are planted. So if you are planning on collecting seed from tree or shrub species and you want them to be part of the 2 Billion Trees program, then it's really important that you start georeferencing your seed collection sites. Georeferencing just means getting the GPS coordinates so we can know exactly where those sites are, not exactly, but which ecoregion that they're from. And that's so that the seed can be used in the appropriate locations. The map that you see here shows the range of white spruce across its Canadian range. In the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, there were many provenance trials that were established across the country. Now, provenance trials, for those of you who might not be familiar with the term, are where seed from a given species, in this case, let's say it's white spruce, is collected across that species range, and then seedlings are grown and they're planted in various locations across the country. And this is to see how seed collected from different regions or areas, call them sources or provenances, would perform under different environmental conditions. Now, when you compare the growth of these trees after 40, 50, sometimes 60 years, it's easy to see the difference between the seed sources. There are a few exceptions, but generally speaking, the trees that are grown from locally collected seed tend to perform better than trees grown from seed that were collected from further away. And that just goes to show the genetic variation within species. And that's something that's evolved over thousands of years. And climate change is part of that. Next slide, please. So what do we mean by fall crops? In Canada, the seed for most of our species actually matures in the fall. We have a few species, such as the poplars, the elms, most of our willows, and a few maples that produce their seed in the spring. We talked about these during our second webinar. That leaves us with the conifers, all of the conifers, the spruces, the pines, hemlocks, firs, larches, most of the hardwoods, most of the maples, birches, not elms, oaks, ashes, hickories, and then there's a whole range of shrub species as well. What's neat with the fall collection is that the window of opportunity is a lot wider than it is during spring. In spring, something like poplars, willows, you might have a few days, depending on the weather conditions, when you have to be there to collect. That window of opportunity to collect is much wider in the fall. It could go from several weeks to a couple of months, even more with some species, unless you get a severe weather event that's going to knock the seed off the trees. And another kind of a neat thing that happens is that you can go to one site to collect one species and quickly realize that there are quite a few other species that you could collect at the same place on the same day. Next slide, please. So look at some of the factors that affect seed production. And these are important. The first thing is that the trees have to be sexually mature. And a lot of that depends on the species. Some species can produce seed very early after, let's say, less than 10 years, whereas other species, it'll take 30, 40, 50 years before they start producing seed. Another factor is that trees don't produce seed every year. Reproduction takes a lot of resources from the trees. So you don't typically get good seed crops in successive years. It's usually 2 to 7 years. It depends on the species, but on other factors as well. If you look at the graph on the upper right, it gives you an example of good seed crops for two Western species, Douglas fir and interior spruce. And that's ranging from, probably about 35 years. And you can see that there's maybe about 10 peaks there. I'm not going to count them all, but gives you an idea that those good seed crops aren't going to happen every year. And you have to be ready when they do occur. Another important factor is stress. Trees often respond to stress by producing seed. So something like a hot, dry summer will often result in good seed crops the following year. Last year, there was that heat dome event that happened in Western Canada. And this year, I'm told that there's a good seed crop in Western Canada. So that heat dome may have been a contributing factor in that, just to create stress. And when that happens, then all of the trees of a species, or say most of those trees, will start to produce seed. And those are the years that you want to be out there and collecting. There's other stress factors as well. Insects and diseases can cause stress, physical damage on the trees, a windstorm or something happening to the roots. Also, trees in urban environments are often more stressed. Just it's a harsher environment than what trees in a natural setting, natural environment would have. I remember one year, this was in the spring, but it was, and I was looking for poplar at the time, and there wasn't really anything that year, but I was driving down and I saw this one poplar tree that was absolutely loaded with catkins. So I stopped and I had a look and quickly realized that the preceding summer, that the summer before, they'd widened the ditch and actually damaged the roots of that poplar tree. And that stress likely caused that tree to produce a lot of seed. Now, that shows, or that's an example of a situation where you should not be collecting from that tree, because a single tree, and there's a lot of other poplar around, is not what you want to collect seed from. You need those good seed years where there's lots of pollen and a good chance for fertilization to occur to get good quality seed. Okay, next slide. So what are some tips that we can use to help us predict what might be coming up, let's say, the next year, or next year, or even this year? We can start. We don't have to start in the spring of that year. We can actually start looking and observing the previous fall. Look for something like male catkins. The image on the left there shows, I believe that is speckled alder. You can see the big male strobili or catkins. And if you look to the left on top there at about 10 o'clock, you can see a couple of the female catkins. They're much smaller, but once these catkins start shedding their pollen in the spring, that's where the fertilization will occur. So look for heavy male pollen cones or catkins or strobili on birches and alders and other species. Another indicator would be conelets on pine, that image in the middle. Most species, the reproductive cycle runs 1 year. With the pines, it's actually 2 years. So that first year, the pine will produce these conelets, and they'll just stay like that, and they'll resume their growth the following year. So it takes 2 years. I think it's actually about 26 months for that whole reproductive cycle in the pines. Now, even though you have conelets, doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to have a crop, because there's still a lot of factors that can influence a crop. Something else to look for are reproductive buds. Some species, it's really, really difficult, if not almost impossible, to distinguish the reproductive from the vegetative buds. But something like red maple here, you can easily see that there's going to be a crop, or that there's going to be flowers the following spring, just by looking at the buds. Next slide. Of course, in the spring, you start looking for the flowers, and flowers are a good indicator. You get sugar maple here, just loaded with flowers. If everything goes well, you would get a very good crop of maple seed. Pollen production on the right, get some pollen cones on jack pine. You usually get some pollen every year, but when you get a really, really heavy pollen crop, it's usually a good indicator that something could be happening. I think a species that everybody's familiar with, or a couple of species everybody's familiar with, would be like pin cherry and choke cherry. Each spring, we usually see loads of flowers on those species, but it's only every few years that those actually develop into a seed crop or a fruit crop, because either pollination, the weather's wrong, a whole bunch of factors can influence that. And the next slide. So getting on to summer, you just start seeing how things are developing. On the far left there's some black cherry, not ready to collect yet. You want all of those berries to be ripe before you even start thinking of doing a collection. Some white pine cones, those guys are getting pretty close. The one on the right, and this is where, even though things look good early on, it doesn't necessarily mean that the crop is going to develop and you're going to have something worth collecting. I've often seen in the spring seeing conelets on I'll use pine as an example, and they start elongating, they're a nice green color, and all of a sudden they start changing color, they start shriveling up, and then the whole thing or most of them fall to the ground. This case here is due to a cone beetle. If you look at up on the upper half of the cone there, you can see an exit hole where the insect left. So all this to say that you need to be constantly looking for signs and monitoring and observing. But it's good to know what might be possible as you move forward. And I think that's it for me. I'll pass it on to Jacob, and Jacob is going to take us through the actual time of collection and talk about some specifics there. So all yours, Jacob.
Okay. Thanks, Bernie. Hi, everyone. My name is Jacob Billings. I'm a tech with the National Tree Seed Center. And today we're going to be talking about equipment and collection techniques used for fall crop seed collecting. So let's get into it. So what are you going to need for collecting wild seed? You're going to need time, maps, and or data, and people or network. So, you know, Bernie just went over scouting, and obviously scouting for viable populations is going to be very time and resource intensive. So use the network that you have, you know, the network of local experts, staff, and friends to help to expand your geographical collection radius. So help you to get outside of where you'd normally collect. So also plan efficient methods of collection. So this includes making a trip plan and thinking about the logistics of multi-day seed storage, having a general route for navigation, and making maps as well that can overlay your seed source data so you can see where your gaps are in provenance. Again, this is something that you can use or share with your network. So obviously, even just going out and collecting isn't something that you do in a day. It takes multiple days or even weeks. So seed ripeness is equal to environmental factors times genetics. So an example of this is, you know, you could have two trees that are very close together to each other, 50 meters down the road, they're in the same environmental stimulus. Because of genetic variation, one of those trees will have ripe seed that's ready to be picked, but the other one will have seed that isn't quite ready. It's going to be a week to 2 weeks before it's ready to be picked. So in that instance, what you want to do is flag that tree, get the geographical coordinates, and keep coming back. Do your cut test, assess for viability, and then collect when it's ready. Because if you do collect too early, it can negatively impact germination viability. And that's kind of the name of the game. And that's what we're talking about here today. And that's why we're doing this. So don't collect too early. Next slide, please. So what else are you going to need for collecting wild seed? You're going to need some basic equipment. Since we've already had webinars, and we've talked about this before, we've talked about equipment solutions for scaling up seed supply. We're not going to get into too much detail on this today, but if you do have questions, bring it up at the end of this webinar and we'd be happy to ask. But this list is basically what we're always going to bring out with us in the field for fall collections. So now we're going to talk a little bit about, where's my mouse? Cut testing. So cut testing is an important technique for seed health and ripeness assessments, as well as for seed forecasting, which Bernie was talking about. The first step in a seed collection should always be to evaluate the seed on the tree you are about to pick from. To do this, we take a few small samples, seed samples from multiple locations on the tree and observe the physical characteristics of the seed. Cut testing can show the overall health and stage of development of the embryo, which is the biggest indicator of germination viability. Cut testing can also aid in revealing decay and parasitism that is not evident by observing the outside of the seed. So what you see can be deceiving. Cut tests can reveal how healthy the seed really is. So when we're talking about cut testing conifers, you can see in the top right of this slide here, we've got, what almost looks to be two tools. One of them looks like a pizza cutter attached to a cutting board, and the other one looks like a machete. So essentially what these are, they're tools that we bring with us that are used specifically for cut testing conifers. The reason why they're so heavy duty is because cones can be quite densely packed. So we need tools that kind of pack a punch that can easily cut through them. So one thing that differentiates doing cut tests on cones versus hardwoods is that with cones, you can expect to find multiple seeds per cone, whereas hardwoods, usually, not always, but usually you expect to find one seed per unit. So this table here kind of outlines, for example, with Douglas fir, during a half cut test, you would expect to find 5 seeds in a healthy, viable cone. Yeah, so let's move on to the next slide. Again, so cut testing hardwoods now, it's kind of important to reiterate that cut testing, we're always doing it for the same reason, whether it's hardwoods or conifers, is to assess the health and viability of the seed. So in the top left photo here, you can see a tool we're using. Actually, what that is, it's called a PVC pipe cutter. You can get it at any home hardware or any local hardware store. But this is just an example of, a tool that we use that's not necessarily used for its natural purpose, but it works really well in the field for cutting bigger acorn and nut type species. At the top, you can see another tool. Those are our hand pruners with the red handles. This is what we use most of the time for cutting hardwoods, doing cut tests on hardwoods. But sometimes we do use a knife as well, but we try to steer clear of a knife just because it's a little bit more dangerous. We recommend if people are looking for the best tool to get for cut testing, that you go out and get yourself a pair of hand pruners up top. You can see some pictures here. So in the bottom left, we've got bitternut hickory. That kind of white, coconutty, fleshy material, that's what you're looking for. That's indicative of healthy seed. Those are indicators of healthy embryonic material in the seed. And that in the same photo, you can see one of them is cut open that looks rotten in the middle. That's what you can't see from the outside, but we're looking to avoid and we're looking to assess. Right next to that, you've got a picture of some sugar maple seeds. So on the left, there's a seed that's been parasitized, and on the right, you've got some healthy looking seeds. So these are all just examples of what you can find, good versus bad. Finally, on the bottom right here, we've got a picture of a tulip tree and some seeds in that fruit. So we have that in there to kind of give an example of an exception to the rule I mentioned earlier about hardwoods having one seed per unit. As you can see with all the other pictures, that is the case, but with tulip tree, it's an example of having multiple seeds per fruit. But yeah, moving forward, I guess, yeah, next slide. So now we're going to talk about some collection techniques. So ground collections, you can literally just pick up seeds off the ground sometimes. So these are almost always going to be bulk collections. And what I mean by this is a bulk collection means that all the seeds you've collected are from an unknown number of parent trees, versus a single tree collection, which means that the seeds that you've collected are from one single tree and you can guarantee their genetic lineage. So you're going to want to look for squirrel caches. I know this sounds funny, but squirrels naturally hide sources of seeds for their winter consumption. So we can take a little bit from these. The important thing to remember is whenever you're picking up seeds and collecting them from the ground, you want to do cut tests. Really, no matter what the collection technique is, you're going to want to do cut tests, but it's more overly relevant for picking them up off the ground because it's more prone to parasitism. So also you wanted to, leave some for the animal and also watch out for mixed species collections. So obviously a squirrel's not going to care if it collects red and white oak, but you do if you're making a collection. So learn to differentiate between the two and be aware that that could be the case. Also in the bottom right photo here, we've got a picture of rollers. These are just specialized equipment for collecting nut and acorn species from the ground. They work really well, but again, we're going to share or we already have shared, but we will again, a document that outlines all this equipment and where you can buy it and how it's used. But other ways you can collect seeds off the ground are by raking and picking them up with your hands, just hand picking and putting down a tarp. Next slide, please. So hand stripping. This is good for trees that you can actually reach from the ground, obviously, and it's nice because it has low impact on the tree. You don't need to cut. So if you can't reach the branches from the ground, but you almost can, you can use a pole hook or a hook stick, which is pictured here on the left. So basically, it's really cheap to build and easy to get a hold of. Essentially, you can use it to grab a branch that's just out of reach, pull it down in front of you. And on the other end, there's a carabiner, which you can use to attach to your person. You know, I usually put it on my belt loop, and then all of a sudden I'm picking hands-free again. And again, low impact because I'm not cutting, and you're usually picking directly into a designated collection bucket, like in the bottom right photo here. Let's move on. So pole pruning, this is definitely the most common collection technique we use at the NTSC. The number one thing is safety gear. So when you're pole pruning branches, it's usually directly above you. So there's a high likelihood that these branches could fall on you or very close to you. So make sure to get some head and eye protection. We usually recommend people get or look for climbing helmets because they have both of those built in the one. They have eye protection. So most people aren't great at orientating pole pruners after they've been stacked 4 or 5 high. It just becomes very difficult. So you're going to want to look for alternative collection methods if that becomes the case, if it's a little bit too high. You're always going to want to cut at the base of the branch. This is so the tree can heal more effectively, which is better for the tree and better for you, so you can come back in later years to collect seed again. And again, when doing this technique, you're always going to want to put down a tarp at the base of where you're collecting, because when you're collecting, hopefully you're collecting at the right time, seeds are ripe, and when seeds are ripe, they will very easily come off their stalks and stems. So just cutting it and having it fall to the ground will knock off a lot of the seed, actually just from the wind when it's in the air. So laying down a tarp can help minimize that loss when collecting seed. Let's move to the next slide, please. Okay, so ladders, lifts, and bucket trucks. So this is obviously 2 techniques that are taking you up off the ground. They're highly effective, especially for conifer species that are hard to climb or get up into because they're so thick. Obviously, you can circle your way around the tree. You can almost strip it. Again, it's low impact because it's usually hand picking with no cutting. The only thing is, obviously, it's potentially dangerous. So adhere to your organization's safety regulations when doing this, and read up on the actual safety regulations and instructions on the equipment that you're using. You don't want to fall. So yeah, next slide. So felling trees as a method of collection. This isn't something that typically we recommend people go out and do. It kind of goes against what we're trying to do here with these webinars and at the NTSC, but the NTSC only collects from felled trees that are already being cut down for other reasons. So we view it as an opportunistic collection. As an example of this, a colleague and I went out to Stewiacke, Nova Scotia to collect hemlock cones from a hemlock stand that had already been decidedly, like it was going to be cut down to mitigate the spread of hemlock woolly adelgid. So we went ahead of the time it was going to be cut down, and we went with an arborist, or 2 arborists actually. We went in, the arborist would climb the trees, they would fell giant branches, and we would strip those branches from the base of the tree. And this was great. We got very large collections, and it made us feel like we were getting the best of a bad situation. These trees were already destined to get cut down, but we were able to preserve their genetic line and hopefully plant those. Climbing. So arboricultural climbing. Obviously, this requires training. It's a great technique for tall, dominant crowns in wild stands. If you can't get in with a lot of tools, sometimes you can bring some climbing gear. But as fun and effective as this is, I would suggest that if you only need to do this once or twice, maybe a year, you're probably better off hiring an arborist to do this for you. That's, they've had a lot more training than you're probably going to get, and they're better at it because they've had more experience. And, we have arborists all over the country. They're in every city. So they're definitely for hire for this purpose. But if you insist on getting trained, reach out to your local arborist companies and colleges. There are ways of getting trained. But again, this is just another collection technique to think about. Next slide. So finally, we're going to talk about recording seed source. So you have collected your seed, but what's the next step? You have it in the bag. You're going to want to record your seed source. So your species that you've collected, the location or provenance, the name of the collectors, the name of the organization that you work for, the project that you're a part of, the date of the collection, whether it's a single or bulk collection like we talked about before, and the GPS coordinates. So another recommendation we have is that you take pictures of absolutely everything. So this is good for you for building your reference points as a seed collector. And it's also good for your network. You know, a picture tells 1,000 words. So instead of trying to ask someone a question about what you're seeing, or, you know, thinking about, you know, I wanted to know what that species looked like in the spring of this year, because I'm going out to scout this year. You know, use the pictures that you took from last year and use that in your network. It's a great resource. So take pictures of everything when it goes right and when it goes wrong, because they're both learning opportunities. Can't stress that enough. So moving on, I think that's it for me. I'm going to pass it off to Kieran Volk. That's going to talk about the step after this. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jacob. Yeah, so as Jacob said, you've collected your seeds, you've labeled them with the proper information. Now what do you do? So we want to be able to transport our seeds either from where they're collecting to the nursery or the greenhouse or the processing facility of our choice. And as both Jacob and Bernie were talking, some days this might be a multi-day trip, so you can't get the seeds from the collection area straight to your processing facility. So we want to preserve the viability of the seed throughout that. And what we have to do that is to reduce moisture and reduce heat. And we do that by keeping it in paper bags. Moisture can escape in paper bags. The seed can slowly dry in paper bags. And we want to keep those paper bags open as well as much as we can. So we don't necessarily want to keep it in the back of our trucks where it could get hot. And we want to open those bags up and maybe give them a stir every once in a while, just to reduce as much heat and reduce the amount of moisture. An example of this is I was collecting with another member of the NTSC, and we collected a little bit in the rain. So we had some yellow birch that was wet. And what we actually did is we brought it into our hotel room and opened up the bags and just let them air dry to release as much moisture as we could. Here's some examples of some racks that you can use to dry down temporarily before shipping those seeds to other areas. There's also research into checking, like weighing those cones and weighing some of those seeds when they're collected versus after drying for a while. And you can do some more research on the individual species that you're collecting. And if you see that weight stabilizing, that means it's dried down to a good level where you can ship it. Because during shipping, you don't know if it's going to sit in a warehouse somewhere. So we want to reduce that moisture. We want to reduce that heat buildup so that the viability of the seeds stay up. And if you have any further questions about your specific species that you're interested in transporting, just ask us about it, because every species is a little different, whether it's a nut-like species, it's a cone, or if it's a different Samara species. And now I'm going to pass it on to Melissa. Oh, here's a picture of our drying room in our lab as well.
A scaled down version of the big seed centers.
Yeah.
I hope my internet holds out. There's a storm passing through, so my internet's a little shaky, but yeah, I'll get towards the end here. And as Bernie mentioned, there's been a long-standing ash conservation program with the NTSC. That's definitely how I've gotten my connection. An early experience was doing concentric circles around the GTA through 2008 to about 2018, 2019. So the last major crop year was 2019 through most of the species ranges, but black ash has been one of the ones that's obviously rising in importance with the threat of emerald ash borer. It's the most susceptible mortality. And I did a recent drive late May from the seed center to southern Ontario, and there, other than some red maple and heavy crop, there's not a lot of species on the eastern seaboard that I've seen yet, at least in the eastern part of the country, with heavy crops, but black ash and green ash and white ash, and we're hearing a few other reports of blue ash as well, being in heavy crop again this year. So the areas in red on this map are areas that we're going to prioritize for collections, because we don't have a single representative GPS representation from those areas just yet. And any of the areas in, sort of yellowish orange, we have a few, but not quite enough to meet our target. So if you're in these areas, please let us know. And especially for the Indigenous collection program, it would be great if your community is interested in it. So those are ones where we keep things separate by single tree, and we will, all the resources shared today would be what we would request donations be identified by. So next slide. And a little bit of new information for those that are involved in the 2 billion tree program. Obviously, there's 3 distinct streams in it that are being funded. Underneath the mass planting stream, this is the top species that have been planted as of May 5th. So there's a lots more species that have been planted, but these have been sort of the top in demand for the first year. And I'll say in demand, but it's what was available to be planted over the last year of the program. So it shouldn't be surprising to anybody that's involved in reforestation that these have had the most stable seed supply over many years. Donnie may wish to speak to this a little bit, but it's interesting that there is one hardwood on there, number 11, trembling aspen. And I was recently out at a BC Seed Orchard Association meeting. So this is just one of the managers with the BC government, just beside a grafted, improved selected white spruce that's in heavy crop in the Okanagan Valley. So Okanagan Valley is not traditionally a place where the species would grow naturally, but they manage these orchards, and they're irrigated to produce the best and most amount of seed possible for the seed planting zones they're regulated for. So last slide there for our presentation, then we'll open it up. So I'm calling it the last poll. For those of you that are new, it might be the only poll you've seen, but anyone else that's attended the rest of our webinars, we were asking lots of questions to see how people were engaging with the 2 billion tree program, or if you're here for other reasons. As Bernie said, this is the last of our planned dates for the webinars. We're going to work on our field season and work with all the existing programs we have, but we will get back into scheduling some more seminars or even just virtual meetings where people can chit chat. So I'm going to launch a poll here. And if you want to tell me what you're interested in hearing about more, or what we should plan towards, and if there's other topics that interest you that you think that we could provide some expertise on, please type them in the chat. We will also probably follow up with everyone that's attended all of our webinars with a similar sort of ask, saying, what do you want to hear the most about as it launched?
While you're setting that up, Donnie, did you want to speak a bit to the list?
Good. Well, Melissa and Kieran are figuring that out. I guess with the list of planted trees, as Melissa said, it's no surprise, because those are the species that our provinces and our forest industries are very well versed in. So there would be a supply of those trees in the initial years of the program. Part of our involvement and our want to do this seminar series and our support is some of those other species, maybe not the common ones that are currently being planted by our industries and provinces, but based on climate change scenarios, might be appropriate for certain regions in the country. So I would expect that over the course of the program that we would see a shift in some of the species, depending on appropriate land and ecosystems and where we're looking to plant. But I would expect to see some more hardwoods sort of creeping into those top 10.
Okay, and Kieran got the poll running.
Lots of responses coming in. This is great. This poll is very helpful for us. So if everyone could please answer it, this is what we'll base our future webinars on.
Mm-hmm. And for anyone that's involved, especially in the germination testing part, there's already been some indication from some of the select few facilities that still conduct a lot of seed testing for industry on that. So that might be a good combination of folks. And pollen storage and collection, that's very interesting. Yes, we do know some folks that are experts on that, Griffin. And yeah, if you guys have had any questions sort of build up in your head, please type them into the Q&A now, and we'll start I'm delegating that in the next few.
We'll give 10 more seconds for those 8 people who haven't responded. And I'm sharing those results now. Perfect.
All right. So are we ready to start some Q&A? I'll perhaps give one to Donnie and Mary, and I will say that Mary has been able to join us from her power outage. So Mary, if your internet is stable between you and Donnie, I'll start at the bottom. Lynn has a question. When you were speaking about the, oh, sorry, there's, yes, I meant to thank our whole team that's shown on our slide right now, our whole team at the Seed Center. So Bernie is on sort of loan for us and always our knowledge exchange specialist at AFC, and then our full team of folks at the lab and working with out extension and outreach. And as Lucy Lavoie, our manager, isn't in our photo there, but she's on the line with us today. And yeah, as Donnie and Mary pointed out, if you want to come for a physical visit, please let us know. Our address is there. So yeah, there was a couple of comments during the chat that we will be sharing the slides and the resources with follow-up. We usually just give it about 7 to 10 days just to let us find out anything else that people ask that we might need to research. So there's some extra resources at the end on the final slide there, Kieran. So there's a lot of English only resources, but there's also some French ones for anybody that has French as your first language. And Mary can also speak to more resources in time that are coming along with Indigenous languages included. But I'll get to the first question. So again, Lynn said that when speaking about ash seed collection, you were talking about volunteers. Are there programs to pay First Nations to collect ash seeds or seeds in the eco zones you're focusing on? Thank you.
Yeah, so I don't mind taking a stab at that. So Lynn, one of the things that actually led to our Indigenous seed collection program was ash. So black ash only comes into seed every 7 to 9 years. And we were getting a lot of requests from Indigenous communities across the nation, always want to become part of our ash seed collection program because they were concerned about it. And we would, put money and resources into training people on ash seed collecting specifically, but then it wouldn't be in seed, and it wouldn't be in seed, and it wouldn't be in seed the next year, and the people we trained would move on. So it was this never-ending cycle of always, looking for funding to help support seed collection, but then it not being in seed. So that sort of planted, the seed for our Indigenous seed collection program, because if we're doing all this training for ash or for species at risk, well, what about all these other species that if there was another problem, an invasive pest, a pathogen or something, or maybe due to climate change, that particular genetic composition of that ecosystem was in jeopardy, that maybe we should start collecting a wider range. So we're really putting the question out to communities, and it's going to change from region to region. What other species are of interest to you? We can do the training, and then, hopefully starting to create small to medium-sized enterprises with communities in seed collecting. So if you're, maybe you're interested in being part of the ash program, but this year there's a great pine, or there's, a cherry crop or something like that. So if we can start making collections of those species and getting them in, and under the 2 billion tree program, we're hoping there's going to be a call for all this seed, which would create economic opportunities for those regions. So to dance around your question, no, we do not have specific money set aside for funding for community members to go out and collect ash. But if we can work with you and involve it as part of an overall seed collecting strategy, then there might be opportunities to make to make some money doing such. Hopefully that helps.
Perfect. Thanks, Donnie. Nathan asks, I wonder what solutions you have for seed protection, covers or some kind to prevent predation before you can collect?
Yeah, so I can start with that, but Bernie or Melissa might want to jump in, and I take it, there are certain species, I know out west with white bark and limber pine, there's bird predation, which is very hard on your collections. And I know, like, working with Parks Canada, they use actually cages where they actually have to go up and cage the cones in the summer so that the nuthatch doesn't predate the seed. We have the same issue here in the east with bur oak, which is a rare species where, Bernie had mentioned that there's usually a bigger window of opportunity for collection, but something like bur oak, which is a very palatable, it's, the seed is actually used by indigenous communities for making a flour. It's very edible. And it's the day those seed are ripe, you can tell they're ripe because the blue jays and the squirrels are just attacking the trees. So, we have, again, beech is another species. We have bagged branches and stuff, but it's very expensive when you get into bagging branches and bagging trees. And for those species, we find that, if they are of importance and high priority, then we really just have to monitor, and be ready to go. And I'm not sure if Melissa and Bernie have anything they want to add on that.
I just add, if you've got a population, they're not all going to come online on the same day. So even though you've missed one tree, there's likely going to be some other trees. The other thing there is that I agree with you with the bagging, in that unless it's a really valuable crop and you need a limited number of seed, it's almost too expensive a proposition to really hit on a large scale. Melissa?
Yeah, I know there's been some chat about edible crops and the intersection with, sort of native seed collection and whatnot. So I know from, I did some schooling down in Niagara, and Niagara is a big fruit production region, and there was a lot of emphasis on starting to transition over to more hazelnut production for Ferrero Rocher, and those guys definitely have need a lot of tricks to make sure that they don't attract a massive squirrel population. So I know there was a lot of different techniques for caging and sort of netting that animals can't completely rip through to protect those hazelnuts. But when you're in a very settled landscape, some of those people benefited just from having very minimal habitat around them. So sometimes orchards do this as well, where they put things in places that the predators are just less present. So I think that should answer that question fairly well, hopefully.
Perfect. Yeah. Tanis asks, in BC, there are policies around not planting trees that have not been improved through breeding on public lands. Do these policies exist in other parts of the country? And how do wild collections dovetail with these types of tree improvement programs? It's a good question.
Yeah, so Melissa, I see that it says that you would like to answer that question. I mean, or is that just...
I think that's us in general.
Us in general? Great. Yeah, so on Crown lands in British Columbia, there are rules and regulations, and they're put there in place. I know we talk about improved seed, and it's a seed that's being selected. They know that it's going to grow faster, stronger, more resistant to the pests that are in that region. But the 2 billion tree program, again, is aimed at planting trees and shrubs that are not currently under provincial guidelines and regulations. So almost all of the public lands in the province of British Columbia and in many of the provinces across the country are already deemed, under provincial forest regulations. So the 2 billion tree program is really focused on other lands. So private lands, urban centers, lands owned by indigenous communities, lands owned by conservation groups. Yeah, so I guess the answer to the question is that it is a work in progress, and the provinces are still working out details with the 2 billion tree program about how they're going to incorporate. But there definitely is, I think, opportunities for synergies within the provincial guidelines and regulations and in the overall scope of the 2 billion tree program.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that because I was out in BC with Tanis recently, I mean, BC has a pretty remarkable system for everything from start to finish, and it's exemplary and world class for advancing, tree improvement programs and really supporting them. So in most of the rest of the country, I think that that's still coming along, and I know that a lot of people cite most of the resources that have been developed, but it's also critically important in BC because of the elevational differences. So for most of the rest of the country and science that I've followed for a long time, where there's where there's more flatter landscapes and across the US, I mean, if you've seen the provisional seed zones in the US that are supposed to cover all wild species, there's a pretty clear divide once you get east of the Colorado Basin, because it just becomes flat and there's not as much differentiation and control over sort of the need to do all that in some cases. But it's definitely, I learned a lot when I was in BC going to some of those conferences, and I would definitely recommend anyone that is interested in that. There'll be some material coming out through the Tree Seed Working Group, is another great group that I help out with. And have learned a lot from. So if anyone wants that, there's some resources that were shared and will be in the FAQ link, but that's another group that you can kind of learn from what's happening in every province, especially from the reforestation policy side of things.
Perfect. Keith asks, will all trees grown through the 2 billion tree program come from seed processed by the NTSC, or will other organizations contribute as well?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and the answer is no. Absolutely not. We estimate that we'll probably, to grow 2 billion trees, you're looking at about 11 billion seed, and we just don't have that capacity. So what we're offering is, using our, 50 years of experience working with, a wide range of species, is knowledge mobilization. But then we're also offering, to certain segments, including Indigenous communities, and we're also working a bit with Parks Canada, that we will be able to do some of the, to help with some seed collecting, to help with some seed processing, testing, and short-term storage, because we understand that it's going to take time. It might take 2 to 3 years for some communities or certain regions of the country to rebuild and reestablish the infrastructure they need, to support the nurseries in the region with the seed collecting from these species that are not necessarily, or haven't necessarily been used in the high demand that they currently are by this program. So that's sort of our role, is just sort of to help when we can. We have used DIP. Again, our collections were collected for the purpose to support research and educational programs in the country and the world. But in some cases, we have been working with a wide range of nurseries across the country who maybe they don't have experience working with certain species. And if we have extra seed for certain species, we'll send them to that nursery so they, they can work with it and see, okay, what do we have to do that seed so that our equipment needs can, support the seeding off that seed in our nursery. Or maybe it's things like certain species that need certain stratification, breaking dormancy. So a nursery might want just some seed to experiment with and do some testing. So that's sort of our role.
Yeah. Lynn asks, how do we assess our geographical area? How do we know it's healthy? Maybe this is more assessing healthy stands to collect from and forecasting.
I'll take a stab at that first. So a lot of the guiding documents about how we set targets, like when I shared that black ash, for example, we said we want about 150,000 viable seeds. divided between 15 to 20 trees for each ecoregion. We kind of have a policy that until we know more about the genetic diversity of a species, we use that as a coarse measure of capturing as much. It helps to make sure that we have at least 20 distinct copies of rare genetic traits that we might be able to find with future technology. I mean, it's really hard to predict sometimes how much seed we're going to need to hold a collection for 20 years because seeds do decline in storage, even with the best science we have. So there's been a lot of great work done, especially at the Morton Arboretum. I'll share a link in the chat or with our follow-up FAQs from a group called Confergen that was all the provincial geneticists getting together to try and cover some of these less common understudied species. But our general rule has sort of been, spacing trees out, making sure that we go to a stand that is what viable would mean was that, no more than or no less than 15 to 20 trees that are intermixing genetics with each other. But even in BC, I know that the conservation assessments, they're looking what they call healthy because of the size of the landscapes they often have, 5,000 trees in a stand is what they consider, a really good, healthy wild population. So depending on where you are and depending on how much forest cover you have, sometimes those targets get to be really hit and miss. In Southern Ontario, where I've lived most of my life, there's a lot of areas that have less than 10% forest cover. So sometimes you're dealing with forest stands that are extremely reduced, and the best you can find is a stand with 10 trees. For certain species, they can tolerate some of that genetic bottlenecking, but it's not that healthy long-term. So I think that leads really well. There's two Lynn's asking questions. So I think that leads really well into the next question. But Bernie or Donnie, do you have anything additional to add to that from your experience with research?
No, I think you've answered that. And
nothing on my end.
Okay, another Lynn, a different one, is asking, I'm wondering how or if you are incorporating climate change into seed collection scenarios. For example, are you using modeling to determine how seed collection sites may change in the future?
Yes, I'm sure Melissa's going to want to jump in on this, but Lynn, so that's the importance of knowing where we collect our seed from. So, our forest industry, reclamation company industries, they only plant seed knowing where it came from. Our horticultural side and our private nurseries, that, if you went to a private nursery, any box store and you wanted to pick up a tree, you have no way of knowing where that seed came from that grew into that tree. So you have no idea if it's genetically appropriate for your particular region. Well, as part of the 2 billion tree program, they understand that and they want to follow suit on what our forest industry, has put so much research into and know. So we want to know where all of our seed sources come from. And once we know where the seed sources come from, then we can sort of look and see, okay, the seed was collected from such and such an eco district. Therefore, based on provincial regulations, based on climate change scenarios, that seed should be good for this range of other ecosystems, more than likely to the north. But that's sort of how we go about this. So we definitely are considering climate change, but the first part of that is knowing where your seed came from in the first place. Melissa?
I was just going to lean on a lot of great work that I've been following for years from our Great Lakes Sault Ste. Marie group. So Dan McKenney and John Pedlar are two scientists that worked on developing the seedware tool. So some people might know about trying to match the future. You're trying to match this moving target, where if you know the general coordinates of where you got something from, you can look ahead into 30, 60, 90 years in the future. But most anyone who's operationalized seed transfer policies right now, they aren't looking too far in the future because there's always a risk of hard frosts and early adaptation survival. So seedware is a tool that I've used for a long time. There's similar ones in the States, and there's ones being developed with all sorts of different inputs that you can do. So if you want to try to match the future annual temperature or the growing season length, or if winter frost is a problem, that's definitely a topic that could be in its entire own webinar or a whole university series, because the science is quite complex and it takes some time to learn how to run the tools effectively. But if that's something that interests folks, that's definitely something where there's either existing webinars, I'll try to find a few just to get you started on how to use Seedware. And there's other folks on this line that have probably know of similar things or have incorporated assisted migration and climate change into their scenarios. But basically, I think the biggest thing that we're hearing and have heard for about 10 to 15, 20 years is that we really need to emphasize in Canada having a wider portfolio of sources to pull from, so that planting projects can select from, not just one single source. And if their local source is no longer suitable for the scenario that's coming, that they've got options to consider. So, portfolios like your investment strategy, you're not going to have all your eggs in one basket. So, and I know that, Mary, do you want to bring up Sherilyn's question there?
So Sherilyn is wondering and interested in knowing how we came to the conclusion that black ash comes into seed every 7 to 9 years.
Yeah, so it's the conclusion is based on the science, and so you're always going to have exceptions. And Bernie alluded to that earlier, how you might have a single tree in a population. And a really good example actually is in Nova Scotia. There's a black ash population near Oxford, and there's one tree there that seems to produce seed almost every year, which is really abnormal. But over 50 years of seed collecting by the National Tree Seed Center, but then looking at other seed centers data across the country, and it's sort of bumper crops have been recorded for the last 50, 60 years. And for black ash, that's just the periodicity of it. It's 7 to 9 years. Again, when you think of black ash, where it grows, it's usually fairly swampy, not really nutrient rich. It takes a lot of energy and resources for our ash to put out a good crop of seed. White ash grows in a little bit richer sites, and it's actually every 5 to 6 years, 4 to 6 years. Green ash produces seed almost every year. So again, every species sort of has that, cyclic seed production. And again, you will find abnormals. You will find the odd tree based on stress, or maybe it's just a genetic anomaly that puts out seed. But for population-based seed collecting, that's what the data shows.
So Sherilyn says, yes, literature cites this, but knowledge keepers indicate otherwise.
And that is why the Indigenous Seed Collection Program, that's part of our program, is to, find out what our traditional knowledge keepers know and to add that into our data and how we do things.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I think that they see it a little bit more often than what the literature shows. And that's just from observation over doing it for 15, 20 years. And I know that we collected on more than 2 occasions during that period. Mm-hmm. And another factor there, it could be that, it's they will produce seed in different places too. So now I've seen black ash produce incredible crops of seed. Just probably, and I regret not taking a picture in 2019 of a site that I was collecting at, and you couldn't see the stem for the seed that were on those trees. It was just absolutely incredible. Mm-hmm.
So she's also asking, could it be produced due to stress when she's looking at the seed productions being a lot closer together or yearly?
Stress could definitely play a factor in all of the species. Again, those trees that are grown in, like what Donnie talked about, those lower areas, the stress there isn't likely going to be lack of moisture. As you get higher up, you could even see on a site, as you move upwards a bit, you could get some differentiation in how the trees respond. I remember one year, this was quite a few years ago, and it was another one of those poor seed years, and I hit an area about 2 kilometers along a road that everything was producing seed. And it was just an anomaly. Something happened there the preceding year that caused those trees to produce seed. It wasn't what I would call a super heavy crop, but it was a good crop where there was nothing else anywhere else. So something happened very locally that caused some seed to be produced in that one area. It's not an exact science, and like the knowledge keepers, we need to learn. It's about an exchange of knowledge and understanding better, because the Indigenous people are much more keyed in to black ash, woodstock, than we are, because it hasn't been on our radar as much. So we definitely need to learn about black ash and other species.
Yeah, one comment I'd put in there too is that a lot of species, including ash, visually, it'll look like the tree is putting out a really good seed crop, but the seed a lot of the time, unfortunately, are empty. Over the last 10 years, the Seed Center's been working on ash since 2004, but even the last 4 years, since 2019, we'll receive bags full of ash seed that were collected, but unfortunately a cut test wasn't done in the field, and the seed looked perfect, but when you cut them, there's nothing in them. They're hollow. So basically the female tree produced a flower, but it wasn't pollinated, it closed over, and it looks fine. But there's nothing there. And that, another species I'll definitely mention is beech. There's definitely something going on with our beech, in that we've had more beech collections sent to us in the last, 5 years, and there's nothing in the beech seed. So the seed looks intact, and we'll get a big bag full of it, and it's empty. It's actually been almost 10 years since we've had a really healthy, good beech collection made. Melissa's going, oh, maybe there was one made sometime before then.
I made a good one last year, actually, with one of the collaborators on the call. So we got a good one down in Norfolk last year, but it was a fun day. I just wanted to make a comment, but going back to the black ash, and I know this only because I spent a lot of time researching where that number came from, as to 7 to 9 years. That's the upper end. I think if you look in some of the resources, some of the original observations about black ash came from Wisconsin, on the very western edge of its range, where it gets really dry. And a lot of times at the edges of a species range is where the periodicity is marginal. So it tends to draw out a bit longer, where people notice a really big crop. So the original paper, I think, that mentioned black ash cropping frequency was 1954 or 59 or something. And then I know that Steve Dion in the Ottawa Valley, where it's kind of core habitat, and same with New Brunswick. I mean, New Brunswick, the reason why it's probably a very important cultural species to most of the eastern communities, First Nations, is because it is very prolific where we are, compared to Wisconsin in some spots. So the cropping frequency, I waited for a long time after I was trained in seed collection to see a crop, but in my area where I'm sitting right now, near Peterborough, the stress crop is really evident. I went to a couple of trees and stands that I had 200 healthy trees that I picked tons of off in 2019. It was probably starting to be a stress crop, because EAB kind of started really expanding from the city of Peterborough around 2018, 2019. And I went back to those same stands. There's some seed on the smaller trees, but they're all peppered with exit holes. So the crop is because of EAB, and it's probably the last chance we'll see seed on those stands for quite a while. So, it is on the ecological time span. Yeah, there's a lot of things that happen interannually, and it is really hard, as Bernie said, to define the statistics of variability over such a wide range. Most of the, citizen science tools and iNaturalist, those things have only really been well populated with data in the last 10 years. So we don't really have a great sense of what the cropping frequency is across the whole range. So maybe 7 to 9 years is when the whole range comes into fruition, like 2019 was, but there's always interregional pockets here and there. And there's, as Donnie said, there's always anomalous trees that that are more precocious than others. So that's usually what breeding programs are also built on. People look for those particular trees to bring into breeding programs because they are precocious. So
yeah,
that's what I'll say.
Thank you very much. That was a very good discussion. I'm seeing some questions pop up in the chat. That's great. We'll get through them. If you did that, if you could put it in the Q&A tab, it helps us keep track of it and make sure that we answer your question. So this one is from Gaetan, and they say, I have a woodlot that I would be open to allow access for people interested in collecting seed. How can I make that happen? I think let us know is the best way. We'd love to collect your seed.
Yeah, one of the things I'll say to any of the people on the call, and we say it all the time, is that, you know, the one thing we're missing, it's eyes and ears on the ground. And the more people that are thinking about seed collecting and are aware of, you know, what dictates a healthy population and when maybe seed should be collected, and then let us know, because we can't be everywhere. So again, for someone to tell us they have a woodlot someplace and it's open for seed collection, that's great. But knowing that there's actually seed to collect and from what species, that moves it more towards the reality that something would happen, including that, you know, if, you know, as the 2 billion tree program goes on, if you're in an eco district where seed is being asked for by the nurseries and stuff, then that's, you know, something I'm not sure it falls under our mandate, but we could definitely do our best to sort of help guide and connect people who are seed collectors to landowners who don't mind having seed collected from their properties going forward. So.
Yeah, I just emphasize in the chat. I mean, I think if you're working from a professional standpoint, I mean, I think that's a totally different ballgame for managing land professionally and permission and access and permits that might be required. But if you're a private woodlot owner, you know, a lot of across the whole country, there's a lot of private woodland associations that are becoming aware of this. And I even had an email with someone today with the Ontario Woodlot Group. So, you know, there really is interest in trying to have sort of a common database and make it easy for people to do this. So that's a great network to try and maybe prime your local woodlot chapter into offering this and especially connecting the local networks. Rebuilding them in some places are really important. So, and I just also put iNaturalist because it's a great way to just georeference, take a picture of something that's common. I mean, I wouldn't post endangered species or your you know, your lawn specimens per se there, but that's another great resource that helps people, especially if you don't know the identification as well. So can help you with keying out certain species that are troublesome.
Perfect. Here's a question from Lynn. I'm wondering, do basswood produce seed every year, or is there a yearly frequency for them as well, as my bees rely on them? And I've noticed that our basswood trees do not seem to be fruiting this year.
Again, the literature would say for basswood every 2 years. So, but as we've already had in discussions, the literature isn't always correct. But in general, that's what the literature is saying, that, you know, every 2 years that you would expect basswood to come into seed. So if it was in seed last year, then, you know, there is a chance that it wouldn't be in seed. Basswood depends on where you're at. I know a lot of urban centers have planted a lot of tilia. And I'm not sure if the non-native tilia is a substitute, you know, allowing for pollen for bees and pollinators or not.
I think so. I would say too that I've already noticed this year, because I was scouting a lot of basswood last year. Last year was a really great basswood crop, and I've seen a few trees that I collected from last year in flower again. So they can actually be semi-annual here and there, but yep. Okay. And yeah, I was going to, unless anyone's got any more questions.
I don't see questions. There's a couple. There's a shout out I wanted to make. Someone, Marika, in the chat. We know we worked with her in the National Watershed Association. So she's asking if anyone's interested in or involved in restoration of degraded habitats via planting hardwood trees and shrubs. she would love to make some connections there. So we're really loving to see all the connections and emails being swapped back and forth in the chat. This is one of the big goals we had with this webinar series, is just connecting people from across the land.
And I might put one more plug in there. I know there was already 2 people or 2 organizations that have sort of put outreach in. If you are an organization and you are interested in any training opportunities, please let Mary or I know. If you're an Indigenous community, let Mary and I know. If not, you can just send me an email. And again, we did receive some funding to help with, with knowledge mobilization. Melissa is currently located in Southern Ontario. So if you're in that part of the country, we can possibly work to have Melissa make a site visit. Our staff in general is going to be doing the Maritimes, and then I'm going to be on a cross Canada trip, August, September, and October. So again, if we can fit you in, we will. And I think that's a wrap.
We were gonna let Mary have a chance to chat.
Excellent.
Excellent. I really want to apologize for not being here and making Donnie give my presentation. But my internet went down, and they were saying that it wasn't going to come back on until 6 o'clock at night, but it came back on at a little after 2. And so I was a little late getting on. So I just wanted to kind of let you know that I'm working with Donnie and the rest of the National Tree Seed Center on the Indigenous Tree Seed Collection Program. And the reason I'm so excited about doing this is because I really believe in it. I really believe that, without seed, we lose too many things. And it's not just the plant species we're losing our access to that species once it's gone. We're losing our ability to use it traditionally or culturally, or to harvest it and then teach our youth about it, and passing on the language along with the culture and the uses. So it's so vital. I want my daughter and her children's children to have access to the same things that I do. So this is something I really, really believe in. And I want to be able to be there to support you guys and push your seed collection efforts forward as well. So I'm here for you. I'm here for the National Tree Seed Center. So I'm that joint between the two. So I'm looking forward to working with all of you.
It doesn't look like we have any more questions coming through. Donnie, if you wanted to have the final word.
Final word is have a great summer, and this is the time to start getting out and forecasting. Take a look and see what's happening out there and start planning. Again, if you didn't see our first 3 seminars, again, they're all on YouTube, and that information is being provided, and we thank you for participating.